Hello everyone and welcome to historic Wrightsville, Pennsylvania. My name is Thompson Dasher and I'm a fellow with the Civil War Institute at Gettysburg College. Today I'm going to be talking about an overlooked chapter in the story of the Gettysburg Campaign and take a look at how a northern community was impacted by the threat of a Confederate invasion during the Civil War. Right now I'm standing along the banks of the Susquehanna River, the scene of one of the most chaotic actions of the entire conflict. On June 28, 1863, over 2,000 Georgians under the command of Confederate General John B. Gordon descended on the town of Wrightsville. He was hoping to secure the strategic bridge that spanned the Susquehanna River. The men who stood in the way resolved to halt Gordon's advance, no matter the cost. Before we get into the events of June 28, 1863, I'd like to first take a look at just what was at stake during this period of invasion. Confederate troops first crossed into Pennsylvania on June 22nd with the intent to subsist on northern foodstuffs and supplies while destroying lines of communication and threatening northern cities. While the Union Army of the Potomac slowly began its march northward to confront this invasion force, there were few federal troops in position to protect south central Pennsylvania. Northern citizens feared for their lives, knowing that their summer harvest, livestock, and horses were all in danger of being seized by Southern troops. More importantly, African Americans living in the region feared that if they fell captive to the Confederates, they would be shackled and sent south to live a life of slavery. In the days following the crossing of the Mason-Dixon line by the Confederate Army, civilian refugees began streaming eastward, many of them passing through Wrightsville. Annie Welsh, a resident of Columbia, just across the river right there, wrote in a letter to her husband, "On Saturday last, it was distressing to witness old and young, black and white, with all that they were able to move, and a great many with nothing but what they had on, come crowding through and into our town." Meanwhile, the Union Department of the Susquehanna was developing a strategy to protect the region, with their primary goal being the defense of Harrisburg. The department called on volunteers to help construct fortifications both near the capital and around the high ground just outside of Wrightsville and Columbia. Many volunteers were young African Americans who were eager to serve their country and understood that their freedom hung in the balance. A Columbia newspaper commented on the work done by these men, who worked side by side with their white countrymen. The newspaper said, "The working party consisted of over 100 Negroes from Toe Hill, divided into reliefs. They have done excellent service, and the cheerfulness with which they shouldered the pick and shovel is in contrast with the reluctance displayed by many of our white citizens to shoulder the musket." Other African Americans joined local Home Guard organizations, taking up arms to defend their communities. Many had relatives who had served in the 54th and 55th Massachusetts regiments and jumped at the opportunity to serve themselves. In addition to the Home Guards, the fortifications were manned by emergency militiamen, along with a small number of soldiers from the 87th Pennsylvania, a regiment raised here in York County. Altogether, there were about 1,500 federal troops in place to defend Wrightsville, with a few artillery pieces on the far side of the river. They were all under the command of Colonel Jacob Frick. Frick had served previously in the Army. He had served with distinction at the Battle of Antietam in 1862. As an experienced officer, Frick knew what all was at risk if he allowed Wrightsville to fall into enemy hands. The Confederates could seize the covered railroad bridge, cross the Susquehanna, and continue wreaking havoc in Lancaster County, or even turn towards Harrisburg. Unfortunately for Frick, he did not have enough men to completely halt John Gordon's advance. The troops he did have were all green and inexperienced, only enlisting a few weeks before. Realistically, the best chance Frick could hope to achieve was to buy time for the strengthening of Harrisburg's defenses before retreating across the Susquehanna. Frick had planned to destroy a small section of the bridge that would render it useless to the Confederates but leave it largely intact. The covered railroad bridge was the only crossing of the river south of the capital and was a vital piece of infrastructure for the local economy. Losing it in any capacity would produce devastating results. The stakes were raised on June 27th when word reached Frick that the town of York had surrendered and been occupied by John Gordon's Georgians. He knew there would be an attempt made towards the bridge here at Wrightsville, but had no way of knowing exactly how many Confederates he would end up facing. Gordon, likewise, had no knowledge of the Union strength near the Susquehanna and set off with his brigade towards Wrightsville, arriving in the afternoon of June 28th. Gordon directed his brigade to move along the high ground to the north and to the south of town, hoping to trap its defenders in a double envelopment. Union pickets manning the earthworks to the south of the town encountered Confederates advancing in column and opened fire. Sporadic skirmishing lasted for a brief time, with neither side sustaining many casualties. However, the Pennsylvania militiamen knew that they could not hold against the battle-hardened Georgians for very long. Gordon ordered Captain Tanner's Courtney artillery to deploy on this hill just west of Wrightsville to drive off the Federals and shell the town as they retreated. As they opened fire, some militia units began to withdraw. One soldier wrote, "When we reached our dog tents in order that we might pull up stakes, as well as gather up our knapsacks, canteens, and haversacks, the rebel batteries on an adjoining elevation opened unmerciful fire upon us, and in a moment all was confusion, and the retreat began in good earnest. The route along that back street was covered with blankets, knapsacks, etc., dropped by the men." Essentially, this retreat was nothing short of total chaos. Soldiers are stripping themselves of their gear, hoping to reach safety faster. And during all of this, Frick is faced with the reality that he must order the destruction of part of the Wrightsville-Columbia Bridge. As Union troops hastily retreated over the bridge, the order was given for the powder charges to be detonated. However, in a rather fitting result for the chaos of the day, the bridge failed to blow. In a last-ditch effort, Frick elected to set fire to a portion of the bridge. However, if you take a look at the bridge pilings behind me, you can see that the fire quickly grew out of hand and ignited the entirety of the structure. While most of the Union defenders had reached safety across the river in Columbia, the citizens of Wrightsville were directly in the path of a raging firestorm barreling towards their town. In an unexpected act of benevolence, John Gordon ordered his men to assist the townspeople in combating the fire. He wrote that buckets and tubs and pails and pans innumerable came from their hiding places until it seems that had the whole of Lee's army been present, I could have armed them with these implements to fight the rapidly spreading flames. Eventually, the fire was extinguished, with only a few buildings in Wrightsville sustaining damage. While the bridge had been destroyed, Frick had achieved his objective by preventing the Confederates from crossing the Susquehanna River. Though Confederate cavalrymen probed certain stretches of the river for fordable water, they were unable to find any. This meant that Gordon would need to abandon efforts to reach Lancaster and Harrisburg for the time being, and instead turn to rejoin the rest of General Jubal Early's division. While the incident here at Wrightsville remains little more than a footnote in the Gettysburg Campaign, it proved to be pivotal in determining the events that followed. And the actions and experiences of those involved here deserve mention in their own right. In closing, here's a quote from one of the defenders under Frick's command. He said, "There was shot and shell enough at Wrightsville to satisfy the most bloodthirsty warrior, and that there probably would have been much more of it had the 27th Militia remained on the Wrightsville side of the bridge, as an inducement to the rebels to keep the fire." As to the destruction of the Columbia Bridge, it is difficult to comprehend how anybody having a knowledge of the situation at the time and the rapid advance of the enemy towards Harrisburg can question its wisdom. Thank you very much.